really excited for our next presentation. It's called Aquaculture Advocacy, Empowering an Industry. And it is my pleasure to welcome Jeannie McKnight, who is the Executive Director at Northwest Aquaculture Alliance and the CEO of the Aquaculture Advocacy Group. Welcome, Jeannie.
Hey, thank you so much, Miriam. Thank you, everybody. I have to say that I feel like scrapping what I wanted to say and change direction because I've been so inspired by the presentations that have come before. But we'll stick to the plan. So I thought that it would be great to start off by sharing my presentation.
For sure.
Here we go. So let me start, please, by, going the other way. I thought it would be good to let people know a little bit about my background, if you don't know it, and how I got into aquaculture. Because as we talk about empowering an industry, I really feel even more than ever that the conversations that we've heard about each and every, let's say in this case, woman voice, our voices are so important in keeping this industry alive. And in doing that, I want to thank obviously all the sponsors, and in particular, I want to acknowledge my new board member, Jackie Zimmerman from Merck Animal Health, who's really inspired me in some of her thinking about aquaculture and the importance of having, the big picture in mind and the big industry to anchor all the R&D that's coming on. I got started, actually, I came out of academia and I was hired to work in a nonprofit helping get the California, Oregon, and Washington fisheries organizations more focused on using underutilized species and helping develop coastal communities. From there, I was hired away to work for the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute, where I was doing a lot of market development work for salmon. From there, I was hired to do media relations for the first Women's Olympic Marathon trial. So I left my job at ASME and got involved in the world of marathons and competitive. And that was the year that Joni Benoit set the world's record for the marathon, which I thought was very, one of the most inspiring things I'd done, even though I took a risk. So I started my own job. And it was mostly focused on seafood. In fact, my early clients were board members from ASME. And but one day I got a phone call from a gentleman with a strong accent saying that he was from Citibank in Chile, and he was trying to do some market research. And the research that he wanted to do was to find out what the American consumer, mostly women, what they wanted in seafood when they went shopping at the seafood counter. And he said, nobody will help me give me contacts to retailers. And I said, well, I will. I've got a whole Rolodex. This just dates me a little bit back to the era of Rolodexes. Let's meet up. He was in Seattle. We had lunch. Fast forward a couple of years after I gave him all my contacts, because, I thought research is good for everybody. I got a phone call from the same gentleman saying that the salmon farmers from Chile, a brand new trade association, was looking to get into the US market, and would my agency, I ran an agency of all women at the time, PR firm, advertising agency, would we be interested in putting our name in the hat for the beauty contest to become the agency of record for the salmon farmers from Chile? At the time, they were called the Association of Chilean Salmon Farmers. So we did. And a couple of years later, we were actually hired to work for them. And I found out later, a few years after that, from their chairman, that we were competing against agencies in New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles. But our secret sauce, to use the word that was just brought up earlier, was, as this gentleman told me, the passion for the industry, the passion for seafood, the passion for what seafood could do for human health. And they hired us. So what hooked me about this industry, in this case, it was working with Chile starting in 1991. In my 25 visits down to Chile, was to see how one industry, one magic thing that nobody knew could happen, growing fish, and yes, they have had a lot of challenges and have overcome them, could change the whole landscape of a country, could put people out of poverty. Now, to me, that was absolute icing on the cake, because first of all, we're producing a product that human beings need to eat and benefit from eating, but it also is a potential to take people out of poverty, to move people into middle-class jobs, to well-paying jobs, now even thinking about, high-paying jobs. And in the beginning, I would say in Chile, what I know was that many of the people who worked in the farms were glad just to have jobs. They were glad their kids could come home from Santiago and start working instead in Puerto Montt. But what ended up happening was they also wanted jobs where their kids could go on to college. So I've seen that whole transition, and it excites me about aquaculture. I feel very fortunate to be in this. So I'm really delighted to be here to talk about this, empowering an industry, what it takes, because ultimately, I do believe that it takes every single one of us, and it takes the talents of people who have perhaps been underrepresented to put their shoulders to the wheel and really move things forward. Our organization, the Northwest Aquaculture Alliance, was formed in 2019 out of the what was the form of the predecessor organization for 25 years was the Washington Fish Growers. And what happened, as most of you know, was that in 2017, there was an unfortunate collapse of some net pens that were operated by Cook Aquaculture Pacific. Meanwhile, I must say that they were waiting to put in new cages. They had just bought the farm, but they were demonized, and the political machinery started in Washington State to go to work to ban the farming of non-native species, and that bill was passed into law, but not until we put up a big fight. And then after that happened, the board of directors of the Washington Fish Growers asked me if I would take over because their general manager was leaving. And so I said, yes, I'd be happy to do that. But I don't want to continue to call it the Washington Fish Growers, because there's one Washington Fish Grower. Let's really create an organization that represents all aspects of the industry and that extends beyond Washington, because that's where the battle is going to be fought. So with that in mind, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I wanted to, what I first envisioned of this presentation. So it's really looking at the challenge and the opportunities of what is this thing called aquaculture? I mean, what are we facing? So I've got a couple ideas and some real life stories to talk about. I also want to talk a little bit about industry and the blue economy ecosystem, as I call it, and how important that is. Then just go over some of the strategies that are making a difference in this industry and who's leading those strategic initiatives. And then, of course, make the plea for everybody's voice being important. Let me just talk a little bit about the word industry, because it is, I recently spoke at a conference of agriculture leaders in Boise, Idaho. And I was made aware through the keynote presentation about some of the groups that have really been attacking the ag industry and trying to put what they call, industrial agriculture out of business. And I think that we face this in some respects as well for, when we're talking about the aquaculture industry. And at one time, the National Fisheries Institute decided to not use the word industry in referring to seafood. They started calling it the seafood community because industry had such a bad rap. And then just as a little aside, at one time when I was on my way to Chile, I was about ready to get on a flight and picked up the LA Times and saw Dan Puzo's headline about the floating feedlots of the sea and industrial farming and how bad it was. And so we've been facing those demons for a long time. And so I think we've got to really take a look at the terminology and what we mean by it. So I kind of like the idea of thinking of it as a blue economy ecosystem, but I'm a word person, so maybe not. I was going to talk a little bit about two fish stories to get us going and thinking about this concept of aquaculture advocacy and what we can learn. So there are two true fish stories. One just happened right before Labor Day this weekend. I was shopping in the Costco, my little local Costco, where I love their seafood counter. And they have beautiful fish all the time. They have, you know, steelhead now being grown in Washington, and they have a lot of Atlantic salmon. And there was a woman who came up to the counter with her friend, and she looked at the counter and said, "Oh, it's all farmed." And I said, "What's wrong with farmed?" And she said, "Everything." And she turned away and walked, or no, I said, "Nothing wrong with farmed." And she turned away and she said, "Everything's wrong with farmed," and just stomped off. And I thought, this is an opportunity, because if we're aquaculture advocates, our retailers should be doing a whole lot more to help demystify how this product is grown. And the second little fish story happened just the same time this summer. I took my grandson on a trip to Northeast Oregon, where we spent a week doing all kinds of things like staying in teepees and paddleboarding on lakes and just, you know, rail cycling. And it was great. But we had dinner at this ecotourism lodge where you could sleep up at night in the teepee. And it was one man owned this lodge, and he and his wife, and there were like 4 teepees. It was, but he cooked the dinner. He also was a chef, and he presented us with this dinner menu. And here we are in the height of kind of political correct Oregon. No offense to our first speaker, but and here's the menu: a 7-ounce fillet of Atlantic salmon on the menu. And I talked to him and I said, and it was fantastic, by the way, I have a picture of it. It was absolutely wonderful. And I said, how, you know, a lot of menus, they'll say they have salmon, but they won't identify it as Atlantic salmon. And he said, "I see no reason why not to." He said, "I think it's a great fish. Our customers love it. You know," he said, "I can get it at, you know, I can purchase it in quantities, you know, at the La Grande, Oregon, or whatever, Costco. And it's been a really popular item. Some people are ordering it every night." And I thought, this man thinks for himself. He's an advocate in his own right. He's got this cute little menu going. And again, I know a lot of work is being done with chefs, but this was, to me, a great opportunity to see how you could menu something that is really fantastic. This is, you know, just to me, it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And the other thing I want to say is that, and this picture obviously is, I borrowed this from the website of the Jamestown Sklallam tribe, or their marketing materials, because obviously this is what else Washington State and the Northwest and the US is known for, and that's shellfish. And this is a beautiful oyster. The other thing I want to say at this point, when we get into talking about aquaculture advocacy, is this. I feel there's, and I'm not the only one saying this, where I'm in groups that we talk about this, is that we're setting up this dichotomy between good aquaculture and bad aquaculture. You know, shellfish, oysters, kelp, that's all good, and it is good. But then somewhere along the line, there's this conversation that says marine net pen, fish farms, bad. And that goes back to my Costco story. So what is the opportunity for us to really kind of get this conversation going as advocates and to change it? So what I want to say is just be thinking about that, because it's going to come up at the end. So in our organization, we have gone beyond Washington State, and we now represent growers in Hawaii. And this, of course, some of you have been there. This is blue ocean mariculture. And we also represent now shellfish growers in Alaska. We have been fortunate to get one company on our board of directors, and it's the Alachique Marine Pride Institute shellfish. But then we also have Oregon, we have Riverence, we have trout farmers, and we have Washington. And the one thing that I'm going to go back to, something that I alluded to Jackie Zimmerman's conversation she and I had, and it's this, that when we're thinking about types of aquaculture and something being good, something bad, there's a real tendency, I think, for people to want to romanticize, well, maybe we can only have aquaculture that's kind of just little small players. But the fact is that without the big players, without the multinational companies, without the companies that have certainty and that have the size and the mass, we really do not have an industry that can spawn the blue economy ecosystem, the people who are doing feeds, the people who are doing genetic research, the people who are coming up with the cage design, the systems, the sonar, the divers, all of the parts that go into the blue economy ecosystem. And you're seeing some of this on the screen, the research and development, the animal health, the Mercks of the world. So I want to just kind of go back to this, is that if we're thinking about advocating for aquaculture, which I feel that I truly am an advocate, is that what are we advocating for? I challenge everybody to say that we cannot compartmentalize and say this kind is good and this kind is bad. Most of the big players are either ASC certified, subscribe to BAP, subscribe to Global Gap. They are potentially, possibly had worked with fair trade. I don't know. I mean, I think maybe Julie, you could find that out, but they can't even get into the supermarkets. They can't get into retail. They can't get into restaurants without having that. And some of them, and I'm going to mention Cook again, because they have even more. They have more certifications. They have British Retail Consortium certifications. So we really need, as advocates, to say, what are we advocating for? We have to have this whole blue economy ecosystem in mind and not get into doing what I think has happened so much in just the early days of seafood, which was pitting us against beef or pitting us against chicken, because a consumer that will be wondering what to buy will just turn around like my lady in the Costco and walk off if she doesn't really understand, or he, what the benefit of the product is. And so I just think that as communicators, we really must work hard to not compartmentalize, not to point fingers at the others, but to really see that we're all part of this, whether it's a small startup, artisanal company, or whether it's a multinational, a Moe, a Cook. Everybody is really in the same passion of growing food, and thinking back to my early comment about chili and helping find jobs for people in regions where jobs may not have even been available before. Again, going back to the chili idea. And one of my other, didn't have this in my slides, but one of the things I did in 2010 was I got involved with the Vietnam Association of Seafood Processors and Exporters, VASIP, because they were involved in some trade disputes with US catfish farms. And I had a chance of a lifetime to go to Vietnam and toured some farms and processing plants. And the best one I ever saw was run by a woman, Madam Khan. She's now hired probably, I think maybe they even have 5,000 employees at this point. But it was absolutely gorgeous. The processing plant was as clean and as spick and span and as high tech as anything I've ever seen. So again, going back to the blue economy ecosystem, the opportunity to take people out of poverty, the opportunity to produce something that is healthy, nutritious, that also helps people become, it fosters the public health. So, oops. I'm going kind of fast here, but I thought I'd shift gears now and talk a little bit about, okay, so we've got these challenges that we all face. We all know, by the way, I so admire the way the BC salmon farmers came together and used all the advocates. You had some fantastic social media going and, at least got 2 years extension on some of them other than Discovery Islands. But I think that that some of these initiatives of getting these advocates really mobilized, I think to do this, we've got to stop thinking, oh, we just need more communication. We just need more communication. If we just put it out there, we'll fight back against what they're saying. I think we need to, and I see this happening. I can take no credit for it, but we need these big strategies that we can lean on. And one of them I want to really give kudos to, and that is seafood and health. Now the work that's being taken on by the Seafood Nutrition Partnership under the leadership of Linda Cornish. I had the good fortune of working in 2005 and in that, or 1985, and then again in 2005 on some big seafood and health conferences that took place when people didn't even know what omega-3s were. And that was headed up and initiated by a woman who was at NOAA, Linda Chavez. But what that did was it changed people's thinking about seafood. And it changed people's thinking about why we need to, keep producing this wonderful product that people need, and it's good for our health. And then the research, we started funding research and found out, oh, it's not only good for your heart. Oh yeah, it's good for children with behavioral issues. Oh yeah, and it's also good for brain development. So again, a big picture idea spawning more research that then helps people understand why we need this industry, because it's producing something good. And then I don't know how many of you are aware of the Fed by Blue. I just love the initiative that I know Jennifer Bushman is involved in it. I don't know who else is involved in it, but it's a beautiful, they've got a beautiful website, and they're talking about why we need, in a very emotional and emotive way, why we need aquaculture to help us as, to meet the development goals to feed people by 2050. We need to be fed by blue, and the blue food food initiatives. That's a hard one to say, but again, that's just a fantastic initiative that's taking place. Another thing we did in our state was we had there's a group that tried to put tried to get Cook to not be able to get their leases renewed, and we as a trade association put together a big issues ad that went into the Seattle Times talking about modern aquaculture, and then we took it onto social media as well as did other people too. And then the other thing I want to speak to, just as far as aquaculture advocacy, and this is actually taken in 2012, and that's experiential, taking people and having them really see what we're doing firsthand, because they don't know. They have bad ideas, like my Costco lady, that fish farming crowds the fish and it's, polluted waters, which nothing could be further from the truth. This was a trip we took down to Chile after they had they had some new regulations after the big ISA crisis. And I organized a group we had journalists, and we had chefs, and we had a woman who's no longer with us who ran the Food Marketing Institute's seafood program. And people were, they were blown away by what they saw, because, and Diane, you'll be happy to see, I think actually this was on Marine Harvest, as it was known then, a Marine Harvest site down off of Port Tomont. You can see the people there, but it's happening. I mean, we just did it here in Washington State. Also taking some people to Cook, some legislators to Cook's Hope Island farm, and they were, shocked, because everything that they had heard in the popular media about aquaculture and fish farming was filtered through this lens of, the anti, and the people who really didn't bother to find out what was really happening. So, this is a really important, I think, something that we as an industry, to get more advocates, need to do, is to get people out there. And I'm speaking now about the farm, and you'll see in my on the back, my visual back here in my Zoom background is from Blue Ocean Mariculture off of Kona, and I had the great fortune to go there in April, where we had a board retreat, and just the amazing work that's being done there with the cluster of at the Hawaii National Energy Lab, where their Ocean Era is growing seaweed, and Blue Ocean is growing their Ceriola, or their Hawaiian Kampachi. But they take people there all the time. And so what happens is people stop being afraid of, what could be happening. We're farming fish, in this case, so I'm talking about fish farming, in the commons, in a public space. So people need to see and be reassured about, the environmental protections that are in place, about the human rights protections that are in place, about the fish welfare that's in place, all of that. So I'm hoping that, that some of these things will take root as we think about what can we do to really change the landscape, to change the way people think and feel about aquaculture, because most of us here are extremely passionate about it. And there are people who are passionately opposed to it, and we may not be able to convert them, But if we can convert some people, then they will become, as one of our facilitators at our strategic retreat said, they'll become our raving fans. I also want to talk a little bit about this whole concept of, in Washington in particular, there's a lot of aquaculture being done, and by tribal entities, but they don't call it aquaculture. It's primarily it's really being done. It's stock enhancement, hatchery work. We had the good fortune. We lost him, but I had the good fortune of having the chance to work for a couple of years with a gentleman who's on our board, Kurt Grinnell. And this was his favorite mantra. And he was an ambassador. He would go to other tribes and say, look, if you hold an animal as an aquatic organism in captivity, provide it with life support, feed and care for it, it's aquaculture. I mean, that was Kurt's main, conversation about, let's not demonize this word. I really wanted to dedicate kind of this to Kurt because we lost him in April 2021, tragically, but his advocacy for aquaculture and his ability to reach out to people in a way that would get them to come together and have a meaningful conversation was a huge loss to lose him. So I kind of dedicate this whole thought of advocacy to Kurt because he's my model of what an advocate could be. And by the way, we do have a scholarship. There's a group of us after he passed away, joined forces to create a scholarship fund, which now has, I think, about $60,000 in it, maybe a little more. It's called the Kurt Grinnell Aquaculture Scholarship Foundation, and it's open to either First Nation from Canada or for Native American youth or anybody who wants to study aquaculture in a 2-year, 4-year trade school PhD program just starting out. So it has been really, we've got our first crop of candidates now that we're looking at to see if they can, do who will be awarding the scholarship to. I know that there's a scholarship that Jennifer Bushman's group has done out of I think it's out of Norway, and they already have picked 2 women. It's women in aquaculture, but this one we really wanted to think about who else is being excluded from the conversations. And from our board's perspective, we really need to get more underrepresented people, First Nations, Native Americans, people of color, as well as women. I think women have been embraced in this industry and are getting, finding their way. And I think we really need to make that extra push to get people who have been typically underrepresented. So I have so much to say, but I know time is kind of running out. So I just, the thing I need to say, and I want to kudos to British Columbia for the work that you did in mobilizing the voices of the people who work in that industry. I was moved sometimes to tears by some of the things that I was reading that were being set out via social media and traditional media. And for anybody in this industry, it's like we need to empower our workers, which goes back to the conversations that we were having earlier. We need to make sure that people are put in jobs where they are allowed to grow and make a contribution, because these are our best ambassadors for aquaculture. It's every single employee in the companies that work there, or everybody who's working in, learning and wanting to get involved in the industry. This is the voice we need to amplify. And that's where the advocacy comes from. So it goes back to the ecosystem of getting good people in your companies, finding people who have a passion for it, and making sure that everybody's represented. It's not just a small cross section of, the white guys in the company, but it's everyone. It's a very diverse face. And I think these voices will make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeannie, for a very informative presentation and discussion.